Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Susan Van Wyk and I'm the Senior Curator of Photography here at the National Gallery of Victoria. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This talk is part of a series of conversations presented alongside NGV Triennial, a major exhibition of contemporary art and design from across the world, featuring over 100 artists and designers. I'm delighted to introduce Lakin Ugambonwo, who is joining us today from his home in Lagos, Nigeria. Lakin was born in Lagos in 1987. He's recognised internationally for his work in portraiture and fashion photography. And he's had his work shown in exhibitions, published in magazines, including ID, British GQ and Riposte magazine. Initially, Lakin studied law at Babcock University, Nigeria, and then Buckingham University in England, before taking up photography in 2012. He first began to show his work in 2013, and in 2015 was recognised by the British Journal of Photography as one of the top 25 emerging photographers globally. Since then, his work has been shown around the world and included in major exhibitions such as NGV Triennial, presented at photography festivals and art fairs. Lakin's photographs move seamlessly across genres and are rich with reference to the history of photography. He made a career and built his reputation as a fashion photographer, revelling in the creative activity of the vibrant Lagos fashion scene. Beyond fashion photography, Lakin is also well known for his portrait photography, which draws upon the tradition of studio photography across Africa. Known for his elegantly styled portraits, Lakin's work is presented in the NGV Triennial with a suite of extraordinarily beautiful photographs. Hello, Lakin. It's lovely to see you here and thank you for joining us. It's a great opportunity to introduce you and your work to our audiences here in Melbourne. So to begin with, I'd really like to ask some questions about how you came to photography. You initially studied law and then took up photography, so that seems like a bit of a divergence from the path on which you were on.
I've always liked visuals. Well, first of all, thank you again for having me here. It's great to be a part of the Triennial. I wish I could be with you in person, but Corona. I've always been interested in the arts. I've always been drawn to photography. I remember I would take pictures of my sisters when I was younger, and then always take pictures of my friends when we would go out. And it was just a hobby. When I was studying law, I realized that I was paying more attention to photography than actual schoolwork. And that's when I knew that, there's going to be a problem. And then as soon as I graduated from law, I decided to face photography full time. But I feel like photography has sort of always been there. And it just got more serious. I think the older I got, I realized, okay, this is kind of where I want to go.
Yeah, great. So are you a self-taught photographer or did you formally study anywhere?
So I will say I am self-taught. I did go to photography school for about 8 months in Paris. I always say that just made me feel more comfortable shooting like in studio, shooting like with equipment and stuff like that. Yeah. But generally, like subject matter wise and the kind of work and aesthetic that I was drawn to was pretty much set.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Mostly self-taught. I don't have like any sort of formal like degree or anything.
Okay. So. Given that you see yourself as self-taught and you have such a strong sense of aesthetic, are there photographers who were an early influence on you or that you were interested in their work?
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely loved like the old guys from here. So I like J.D. Ojekere. He's done the series with the headgear, so gele, and the hairstyles. I love the work of Malik Sidibe and Seydou Keita. Internationally, interestingly enough, I actually really love Guy Boudin a lot. Yes, when I lived in Paris, I mean, he was somebody that I was really drawn to. I was just drawn to the simplicity of like
Mm,
his work, but how vivid and how sort of like in your face it also was. I also love sort of like the older like fashion guys, so the Helmut Langs and those other people, like
mm,
classic Peter Lindbergh, all this classic black and white images. I liked Vivian Sasson as well, which also was reminiscent of like Guy Boudin, was just the use of color and shadows and texture and silhouettes. I just love the simplicity of the frame, but just how impactful it still was visually. So yeah, those are the guys that. Oh, I really also loved Andrew Dosunmu. He's a film director and Nigerian photographer, but I think he's based in New York. I also love the way he shot like black skin and all.
that's a great list of influences. Um,
It,
it's interesting that you mentioned Guy Boudin, because when I was looking through your back catalogue of images and thinking about works other than the ones we have here in the triennial, it was Guy Boudin who came to mind most strongly for me, and it was because of the colour and something about the kind of posing and the way he was working with models. It really, I just felt like there was such a strong visual connection there. So that's really interesting to hear that Bourdain was so important for you. Great photographer.
he was he's
Yeah,
fantastic. I actually have talking about him. I loved his work. Love. I think it's brilliant.
yeah, absolutely. Great magazine work too, the way he was able to use a page so well and
Yeah,
understood the way a photograph appears on a page. And I think that's
yeah,
a really interesting thing about photography, that it presents in so many different formats. So here at the moment we have your works on the wall, and they're presented in that much more traditional gallery setting. They're framed, they look amazing, and when you walk out into that space they're beautiful. But it's that different way things read when they're in a magazine, or when they appear in social media, they have a whole other presence as well. So
we do.
can you tell me a little bit about the role of social media in your practice? Does it have a role?
Honestly, I'm sure if I thought about this deeper, it probably does in a very unconscious, in a subconscious way, because we live in a social media era, right? So like everything is somewhat influenced, but it's not a deliberate thing. I actually have a very tumultuous relationship with social media. Um, I find I find social media as performance through and through. You're performing artists, you're performing yourself sometimes, all of that for strangers to consume. Now, people would say that someone will argue that you're just sharing your life or sharing yourself with other people, but there's a performance aspect to it because it's not ever everything, right? And that exhausts me. And it's just like to keep up. And I mean, something as like the kind of work that working as an artist or like just even being, you always want it to come from the purest, happiest place. And then to think that you're going to like do it just because some people are going to double tap and then have like, yeah, it exhausts me. Now maybe I'm thinking it, but yeah. So social media doesn't have like a direct impact into the work that I do or how I do the work.
Yeah.
There is just an awareness of existing in that space because it's important to exist in that space in these times. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it
the
is.
most of it,
Yeah, sure. So today you're talking to us from your home. You're in Lagos.
Yes, Lagos. I am.
So, I mean, it's a quite remarkable sounding city. I've not visited there, but does the city itself exert any influence on your image making?
Very much so. I mean, I would even say specifically Lagos even much more than Nigeria as a whole. So Lagos is the business capital of Nigeria, if you will. It's very busy, it's very loud, it's very colorful, it's very vivacious. Like it's when you get into Lagos from the airport, there's like an attack on the senses. It's hot, there's just a lot of activity. You are like it. You can feel the energy almost immediately you land. I always say Lagos reminds me of the energy that you probably get from like in New York. It's just very like it's like a little madhouse, but like madness that somehow still functions. And I see how that influences my work greatly. Again, even just from like the use of color. Lagos, it's just vivacious. It's very vibrant,
No.
and it definitely influences my work. I grew up in Lagos, and then even the culture, how we relate to one another. It's a huge influence on what I do and how I do it.
That's quite a picture that you've just created there. It's, yeah, very exciting. So we're
It is.
talking together today as part of the Melbourne Fashion Festival, but
Yeah.
I know from reading about your work that Lagos has a pretty amazing fashion scene, and unless I'm wrong, I think it's about the 10th anniversary of the Lagos Fashion Week. So it's got a great lineage of that whole festival event around fashion. Can you tell us a little bit about the festival and the fashion scene from your perspective as a photographer?
The fashion scene here is a very interesting one. I mean, fashion has always existed. People have always been stylish. People have always made clothes, and all of that. I think as the world started to pay more attention to Africa, everybody realized, oh, these people do like interesting stuff here, and then there was now like a spotlight on it. But I feel like 10 years ago there was like a new breed of like artists, period. So from designers to photographers to painters, that came. I would say maybe the millennials that had like a fresher vision of like how they related with like home textiles and known silhouettes that we know even from filmmakers, the kind of story they wanted to tell. And I feel like fashion was one of the things that had like a rebirth in like 10 years ago, like I said. So like there were brilliant designers like Makio, she's a women's wear designer who is based here, and she started to make fabric using like a local like dye technique. And then now with her, more people started using very local like fabric and then making like contemporary wear. And it was fantastic to observe because I got to sort of document it in a way. It was a powerful shift, and it was one I didn't even realize until last year when it was the 10th year anniversary. When just looking back, like, oh my goodness, we really did all of this stuff over the last decade. Yeah, as a fashion photographer, starting out as a fashion photographer here, watching more designers be more conscious of the kind of clothes they're making and where their fabrics are coming from and the stories they're trying to tell with tying it to like old traditions, and it's just a beautiful and very inspiring. It's amazing to watch. It's very, very amazing to see.
It's interesting that you talk about the designers thinking about the stories that they're telling through their creative practice, because that would appear to be a significant aspect of your work as a photographer as well. I mean, it's not just about the clothes and the image. There's this rich underlayer and life as well in your image making.
Thank you. I mean, I think for me, I can even go as far as saying now that I feel like seeing some of these designers and the kind of stories they were telling just from the clothes, and even the specificity, like, there were people who were telling stories from like the print, and I got educated in those times about like how certain patterns, meant certain things back in the day. So maybe if a woman wanted to mate with her husband, she would wear a certain outfit, and in just them introducing it into like contemporary wear, that was inspiring for me. And it was with my work and trying to tell like African or Nigerian stories, specifically like Lagosian stories, it was always looking for those nuances and the layers that we know here and the world can now engage. But I think that's what it is. You're supposed to like engage with the layers and the nuances of like your culture, and then like share it with whoever you share it with. And
I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it, with fashion and fashion photography, because they can be such insightful barometers about a place and a time and what we aspire to and what we're thinking about, what's topical, what's our history, where have we come from. And I always think that fashion and then its representation through photography is such a powerful social voice. It's a great way to learn about time and place.
I completely agree, and it's one of the reasons why the work showing at the Triennial now, Are We Good Enough, is very important to me as well. It's also one of the reasons why I loved, like I said, J.D. Ojikere and Seydou Keita and Malik Sidibe, because what they were doing was just in studio portraits, right? And they were just like having people, but even from like the clothes that the people were wearing, how they were engaging with one another, all of those things, like they were documenting those times, and it's a proper document of what those people were at those times, how they interacted with one another, how they partied, how they dressed, how they loved. You could see all of that from just from those images, and I think it's powerful. You are right. The relationship with fashion photography and fashion, it's much more layered than people treat it or people like see it to be.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, I mean, in your work, you work in fashion, and you have this very, very strong relationship with the fashion industry in your hometown. And then you also produce these quite remarkable portraits as well. So do you have any personal distinction in the way you think about the different aspects of your work? Do you... is the commercial fashion photography compartmentalized from the creative portrait work or other work you do, or is it all part of that same rich brew?
So I will tell you the truth is, when I started out, right, I always saw it as I always called myself a fashion portrait photographer first. But I was very aware, like I said, I was very aware of the layers and the nuances of just like culture and clothing and light and things like that. And every time I would shoot, I would always want to like incorporate that, and that's why I think my work sort of teetered on straddled the line of like fashion and art. So in my head, I always take, every time I'm behind the camera, I always take the awareness of the nuance and layers onto every set. However, with very super commercial work where there is a brief or a very set brief, I may have to deviate away from that from time to time. But these days, lately, I haven't been doing super commercial work. I just do like portraits or like my own personal work. But there is an awareness that I try to take into every set. So once I'm behind the camera, it's just like an awareness of like what I want to create and how I want to create it. And honestly, at the core of everything that I do put up, I really just want to create like beautiful, striking images. It's something that I've just always wanted to do.
I think,
regardless of what it means intellectually.
Mm-hmm. I think there's absolutely no doubt that you do create beautiful, striking images. And if we look at the works that are in the Triennial here, there's a group of photographs from your series, Are We Good Enough? And they're so elegant and they're so beautiful. I think absolutely you achieved what you set out to with that series. But, and it does seem like, you've talked about with that series about the significance of the headwear, the hats that your model is wearing. And so you give that great context for that historically and in a contemporary setting. But is this a body of work that you see really bridges across those two aspects of your practice that you were talking about with fashion and portraiture? Because it seems to me that it functions beautifully in both realms. Yes, actually, it's very much so. It's one of the first bodies of work that I realized that teetered on those two aspects. What I don't think I've shared with a lot of people is, I don't know if people realize that with this body of work, it's actually portraits of the hat. The model or the sitter is the object, is a prop. It's really portraits about these hats. Colors and the textures, and obviously, and then with it, the average Nigerian knowing the layers and knowing meanings and knowing what it means to wear this hat, or who would wear this hat, where they would wear it to, like the relationship with the hat. But like really and truly, it's the portrait of the hat, and the hat in itself is a fashion accessory. So yeah, it teeters on fashion and art, like I said, very perfectly. Yeah, but a lot of people don't realize that it's really important. So I don't do well with product photography or still life. It's just not something so that's why I felt the need to use a body
or a black body, which looks like to put it in context. But it's really portraits of the hat, and the sitter right there is the prop.
That's a lovely idea to make portraits of a hat, because the presence of the model is very powerful in the images, but it is absolutely the hats, when you see that sweep of them, that each one is so individual and is so striking, and the texture and the fabric and the colour is so individualistic from one to the other. So that's a great way to describe them as portraits of a hat. And I guess in some ways that's what, that's what great fashion photography is too. It's about creating a setting and a story, but it's a portrait of a garment. It's not a portrait of a model necessarily. So it is that, it's a sophisticated and complex relationship, isn't it, between the garment, the model, and the photographer. It's an interesting thing. So with the Are We Good Enough series, do you see them as any way being, well, they're portraits of a hat, as I now know, but are they portraits about identity as well? Because each hat is so striking and so particular.
Yeah, but very much so. Obviously, in Nigeria, we have 3 main tribes, and then there are other tribes. And with all these tribes come with like different languages and different foods and different way of living, and different clothes, different way of seeing the world and seeing one another and seeing the other tribes. And so with the hat, I mean, I'm trying to, and it's with this series, it's something that I'm going to keep on shooting. I'm trying to capture each and every tribe as much as I can, and even the subsect of those tribes, because, like you said, it's all about individuality. Each one is different. The person that is wearing it is different. How they would wear it is different. How the relationship they have with the hat is different. The relationship that they have for as far as expectations when they wear the hat is different. And you see, going back to what I said about them being portraits of the hat, you see that the sitter doesn't change. It's the same brown body. It's almost the exact same thing throughout. It's that hat that difference, and the question, what I started doing is there's something about masculinity and expectations of that, because again, it's generally men that wear those hats. I got to a point where I started to look at topical issues, masculinity, what it meant, and I wanted to have the most Nigerian conversation about masculinity. The way masculinity would be engaged with in Australia is very different from the way it would be engaged with in Nigeria. How they may be general overtones, specificity will always differ. And I wanted to look at things again, like I said, traditional hats. There are other layers of being a man and how you expect to be as a man here, but I chose to use the hat as a signifier for individuality and masculinity.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you for explaining, taking us through all of that and that significance and how that's working in your images. It's a fabulous series of work. It's not your most recent body of work, and I must admit, it's all made me curious about what are you going to do next? Where are you heading next with your work?
So I've been thinking more about doing film work, moving images, so short films and stuff like that. Again, still exploring Nigerian stories and the nuance of our relationships and how we engage and all that, because I find it very very special. I find. So there's definitely more film work coming. I'm going to start a new series in a month or so. That is it's more personal than cultural, if you will. It's just chronicling. I'm trying to create a visual representation of what 2020 was for me, because in 2020 I was in my head a lot. So it's going to be a lot of again, just visual representation of what that year was, what last year was, and then show them later this year.
Well, I look forward to getting to see some of that imagery and seeing how you move into moving image within your work. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and talking with me today. And I'm sure all of our visitors are going to really enjoy this insight into not only the works that are included in Triennial, but the way you've been able to talk to us about fashion and photography and the history of photography, and that beautiful way that you bring all that together and you weave it so seamlessly into these suites of images. It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Lakin.
Susan, thank you.